And welcome back to another edition of Granger Talk, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives of current and former students who embody the essence of a true Granger. I'm your host, Jamie Bozeman, and with me today we have co-host Mr. Ryan Slay and Aiden Blackwell. In our debut episode, the first in this series, we will be exploring the genesis of the Granger Graduate Profile and the blueprint that defines what it truly means to be a Granger. Joining us today on today's podcast is Mr. Randy Hardigree, IB coordinator and a key member of the team that brought the Granger Graduate Profile to LaGrange High School. Welcome to the show, Mr. Hardigree. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mr. Blackwell, today we want to talk a little bit about the IB program that's here at LaGrange High School and then kind of how the evolution of that program, getting it started here at LHS, kind of led its way into developing what we now call the Granger Graduate Profile.
Yeah, so Randy, if you could give us and the listeners some background on how the Granger Graduate Profile came to be, but first, what is IB for? I feel like there's so many thoughts and ideas in our community of what IB is from people that don't know what IB is. And I feel like this is a good opportunity to kind of get it out there. What is IB? Where does it come from? What are the principles of it? What is IB?
Right. So first of all, the IB, which stands for the International Baccalaureate, is a global organization. It's been around since the 1960s. It's not a new idea. It's really gaining traction in the U.S. in recent years, especially in the state of Georgia. More and more schools are becoming authorized to offer this program to students. And it really started here back pre-COVID, really. Between some of the administrators here at the school, and you know, we have a tradition of excellence at LaGrange High School, and we're always looking to continue that and carry things to the next level. And so there's always this conversation of what can we bring that we don't have now, you know, or what we know that we believe that our students are awesome, that they're incredible kids, and that they have so much to offer. And so the conversation began, you know, and we began to explore as a school what is the IB. You know, we had heard of it, but we didn't really know what it was. And for me, I can say, you know, I'm 30 years into an educational career, and when I began to learn about the IB program and what its purpose was, I began to latch onto it quickly, and the deeper I've gotten into it, you know, which, you know, ultimately led to me being the coordinator of the program, but we had to go through an authorization process, which was a very demanding, very strenuous process to be approved by this international organization to offer this program. But what stands out is that it aims to develop the whole student. It's a very comprehensive approach to developing a graduate that's ready to become an active member of society, you know, of the community that they're in, whether that's at the university level or whether it's at the career level, that wherever they go, they would be equipped with self-discipline, with a mindset of international mindedness, and you know, just becoming interactive with the people around them in a way that is non-judgmental and able to communicate well with people who may be very much like you or may be very different from you. And we know that that's becoming more and more relevant today than ever. You know, that we all at some point interact with more people from other places than where we are from, with other beliefs from ours, with different cultural backgrounds from ours, and we all need to hone our skill at being able to do that effectively and being citizens that promote good communication and collaboration and peace. And the IB really believes in all of those things. And, you know, one thing that sort of anchors the program is a concept called the IB Learner Profile, which really is a list of character traits. And character education is not something new in Troup County, all right? But it's been some years, really, since there's been a distinct focus on character development, I guess. And so that's one of the things that really grabbed me about IB is that the IB learner profile is sort of infused into everything that they do, which includes things like being caring, being knowledgeable, being a good communicator, operating by principle, being reflective in the way that you go about your choices and about your communication, becoming a lifelong learner, being an inquirer, being an inquisitive person, being a risk taker, in a good way, a risk taker, being thoughtful, and there are several others, but for me to see something that brought that to the table was huge. And so from there, a conversation started at some point about what is a Granger.
So all those things that you're saying, they all sound great. I mean, they really do. And it sounds like something that every single student should have access to or should be subjected to at some point throughout their course of their 4 years in any given high school setting, right? But when we talk about IB, how many kids do we have in the IB program right now?
Right now we have 2 cohorts. Our inaugural cohort, which are seniors at this point, there are 39. And then we have 25 in the second cohort.
So think about that for a second, and maybe I think this will lead us into the next kind of segment or question we're fixing to go to. But if we're talking about roughly 50 to 60 kids, LaGrange High School has 1,300 students.
Right.
So if all these things are what we're trying to do with a small fraction or a small person, that's like 1% or maybe less than 1% of the population of the students that we serve, right? Then how do we do those things but yet bring in the entire student body?
Well, and then part of the conversation you and so like for the listeners, Ryan and I were at Think College and Career Academy. I was there for 7 years. You were there for
4.
Prior to that, you and I were both here I was here for 7 at LaGrange High School, 7 years. What were you here?
16.
15. Yeah, so we were coming back to being at Think. One thing that Think had in our charter, we had to have a graduate profile for kids that were leaving Think Academy. We had to say that when a kid leaves Think, that they embody these things. And you and I, Jamie, met over the summer before I came back, so before I started, so summer of 22. And I asked you, do we have a graduate profile? Because I didn't think we did, because we didn't last time I was here. And that's when you were telling me, okay, well, we just did this thing at the school to build the Granger Graduate Profile. Because absolutely, everything that Randy just said, everything are things that all students and all people should strive to develop into. And so, so how's the conversation go to, all right, team of however many teachers in the school, we're going to develop what it's supposed to be a Granger? What's that look like?
So,
how did that happen?
So, like Randy said earlier, pre-COVID, we were having this conversation about the IB program and what it could possibly mean for LaGrange High School. Do you think we can pull it off? All those questions. How hard will it be? What needs to happen first? And then COVID hits and shuts us down. Well, when we come back from COVID, we didn't just say, okay, that was a conversation we were having. Let's resume that conversation. And we hit the ground running. Well, as we start running towards the goal of becoming an IB school, certain questions and ideas start to, creep into the conversation that were not necessarily IB questions. But it was like, you do have a faculty and staff here of 88 people. Okay, altogether we serve, we have 120 folks on our staff at LaGrange High School, but certified teachers, we have roughly 88 folks. You have 1,300 students. You're not going to be able to serve all 1,300 students in an IB program at LaGrange High School. You don't have all 88 teachers involved in the IB program directly right. All right, directly in LaGrange High School. Indirectly, all students should be affected or impacted, and all staff members. How does that happen? And also, the principal at the time, Mr. White, I said, we've got to be careful here, because if we start a program that is going to serve a small group of people, all right, and only a small portion of our population, our teacher base is going to be involved in this directly, we can't build a wall and it's going to create 2 separate schools within one building. It's going to be an us versus them kind of thing. How do we either knock that wall down or prevent it from actually occurring before it's erected? And he said, well, what are you talking about? So this is where we started, breaking things down and looking at the IB learner profiles and getting in the room with some pretty smart folks, saying, what is it that we can create school-wide, holistically, that we can all subscribe to, all right, that we can all work towards as an end goal, and yet it not necessarily be IB related, but yet the undergirding part of it, the structural pieces of it, they are IB related. Because when you look at what Mr. Hardigree was talking about a while ago, all those things and the way in which the IB classes are taught, I mean, you two are IB teachers, right? All three of you are. Like, the things that you do in there, those are just common pedagogical best practices. I mean, I don't care if you're teaching, ex ed, co-taught, general ed, AP, whatever, IB, those are the things that you should be doing. So our question then led to, all right, how do we then come up with this Granger profile? What do we call it? And then it came to Granger Graduate Profile, but using the ideals, behind IB and the learner profiles, and kind of those best practices, pieces, but yet selling it to the staff as LaGrange High School.
And you did we did
a PL on that.
Right, and everybody, you felt like it was all bought in. Like they developed the star, is what I'm going to call it.
Yeah, definitely. And for what it's worth, the IB is aware of the risk of what you're talking about. Of a wall that divides a school. They don't want it to be that way at all. And even though they realize that in many schools, there are schools that are the entire school is IB, but in most schools not so. And they don't tell you how to do it, but they do warn you that if we give you the authorization, then you're embracing these principles, and it's really on you to infuse that into your culture. And so, and then going back also pre-COVID, Jamie, this talk of what a Granger was going on really even before IB even came into the picture. Because, for one thing, this is a school steeped in tradition, strong tradition in this community. And you're quick to hear a Granger as a champion, but then we had already been talking about, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And so it wasn't surprising then that what we did in the PL sessions evolved the way it did, because like I said, I do believe in all of this, and I think it makes sense that the two go together.
Right? Well, if you dig into that a little further and you back it up, we're all expected to model and teach soft skills here. Mm-hmm. It's a part of what we're expected to do. Everything that you're describing there, that's a part of the IB and what their expectations are of the students involved in that's soft skills. And the community at large has bought in to that model. If we go back to what Aiden was talking about with Think, that the business community created their rubric for soft skills, and originally there was 13 things, right? On that. So if we're talking about having some consistency for the students, which is good, a lot of what was in those 13 soft skills, I think, is in this IB profile as well. Mm-hmm.
So, Jamie, you and I had a conversation. I'm sorry.
I wanted to say what Ryan just mentioned. I've had a lot of conversations here lately in the last year and a half, especially in my role now as principal, with employers in our area, and not just in our area, but if I go back and I visit home, or in South Georgia or Northeast Alabama, and I just talk to business owners, or I talk to managers at business places, part of the things that they talk about that they deal with the most as young adults coming out of high school, 20, 21, 22, 24, that kind of thing, are those soft skill things. That's the issue that they have the most problem with. I mean, or the concept they have the most. It's not the fact that, can I be a skilled laborer and do this because that's what I went to school to study, or am I smart enough to do? That's not an issue. No. The issue is just like being on time, having a
work ethic,
that
critically
kind of thing,
thinking,
right?
Communicating.
And it's just like, so if those are the things, and it's not, so, I go back and I look at all of our classes, and I'm thinking, all right, if our classes are training young adults up in content knowledge, that's one thing. But are we missing the boat somewhere over here? Which is kind of where this stuff goes back to.
And the community has said yes.
Yeah, absolutely. They say that is exactly what they say. If you can figure this piece out, we can get them to this part.
So like a teacher thinking, this is where like that graduate profile used to hit me, was we had a lot of kids that worked at Chick-fil-A, right?
Yeah.
And a kid works at Chick-fil-A. You can tell a Chick-fil-A employee because they're always going to say "my pleasure" like every time.
Right.
In the classroom, they're going to say it. Mm-hmm. And so that one got me thinking about, okay, well, we got 3 high schools here, 3 public high schools in the county. What distinguishes a LaGrange High graduate from a Callaway graduate from a Troop graduate? And we had talked about, like, if you were to talk to somebody on the thread, just stop somebody and say, hey, tell me about what you think about LaGrange High School, or the people at LaGrange High School, or the job they're doing, or their students. What's that look like? And the ultimate goal, well, it's not the ultimate goal, I guess, but one of the goals should be that when we put our stamp, when they get a diploma, when they walk the stage for LaGrange High School, that people in the community can say, that kid is going to represent these things. Which is why when you showed me the star, we need to get Mike Evans to put it on the link to this, however we do this, so that people can see the star. Each teacher has this Granger Graduate Profile star in their classroom. And that should be our focus at all times, right? And it's about being intentional, that everything I do, every lesson I teach should be about building on those principles.
Right. It should be. Like one of the things that Randy talked about, one of the things that's on the star is thinker.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, I don't have to go in there every day and say, okay, remember this point on the star
Right.
is thinker, but like the way that I, design and the way that I see and conceptualize a lesson, like I should ask myself that question. When my kids go through this lesson, at the end of it, have they had the opportunity to think? Am I requiring them to think?
Right.
And it becomes this involuntary, attribute all of a sudden, or characteristic that you continue to build upon with inside of yourself. And then you look over here and they're good communicators. Well, are they? Are you having them talk? Are you having, those are they discussing things? Or is it just like superficial, surface level kind of conversations that they're having with people and they can't communicate one idea because it's so vague,
So let's get into what the star is, because you mentioned thinkers. So Aaron Calhoun has the acronym, I guess, of EPCOT.
Yeah.
EPCOT.
Which is easy for me to remember. But EPCOT, so for everybody, empathy, they should be empathetic, principled, communicators, thinkers, and open-mindedness. So they take all of like the things from IB learner profile and condensed it into those 5.
Which, for those who may not know it, so there are 10 different elements of the learner profile, and the star is a long-standing symbol of LaGrange High School for those, who may not know that. So kind of, the task was to sort of group those attributes in pairs, really, so that they would take the points on the star. And sorry, go ahead, because I interrupted there.
No, so Ryan and I are both AP teachers for years. Mm-hmm. Ryan, what's the difference? What difference do you see between AP and then IB, and then how these characteristics are kind of different in that?
Yeah, so as a psychology teacher, teaching AP and IB,
which you can register for starting in March.
So. But looking at it from that perspective, that's the thing that I've taught. The AP class is really there's some thinking. We're certainly diving into some key issues and thinking, but it is trivial pursuit. The AP exam, especially for psychology and several subjects, is a trivial pursuit. So it is names, it is experiments, it is concepts that you have to basically be able to identify and relate to one another and stuff like that. And it's hard, and it's a lot of material, and it's go, go, go. In the IB class, curriculum-wise, we're probably looking at maybe 40% of the AP curriculum that we're actually teaching. So there's huge chunks that we don't do that you would normally do in a basic psych class. However, what we're doing is we're not saying this is this research study. You need to know, what it was about, what were the variables, and what was the outcome, maybe what was the ethical issues. We're actually taking that research and driving down and drilling down into it further. We might be conducting that research. Right. So now, instead of them having to do a multiple choice test and a couple of FRQs where they're identifying some key vocabulary, they're only writing on the exam. So in that writing, they are building a case, they are proving that case with real psychological research that has been done. Then they're poking holes in that research on what the confounders, what the problems, what the ethical issues are in that research. Then they have to still prove that what that research proved is valid and reliable. So they have to bring in other things, and they should have to show analogies between two different pieces of research together. So that on top of the fact that they have to do an IA. So in IB, they have to do an internal assessment in which they are conducting a replicated actual experiment and writing about it. So the curriculum is less, but the depth and the expectation on the student is so much more. They have to be collaborators in IB. It's a requirement.
And the collaboration piece is, I mean, that's your thinkers, that's your communicators, that's your open-mindedness. It's having hit all. For me, teaching history, empathy is such a large part of what I teach in IB compared to like my AP. Like the speed of AP is so overwhelming.
Right.
Versus like we're looking at perspective. It's not like this happened at this time with these people, move on. There are multiple ways to look at any particular historical event. And then we need to understand how all of those sides feel and saw it. Like empathy is such, I think it's the top of the star of the Granger Graduate Profile. And I think that's a quality that a lot of people could spend some time developing.
I think for sure when a person takes the IB history class or a person takes the IB psychology class, commonly what you're going to be doing is being put in a person's scenario outside of your own shoes. You're now in that person's perspective, in that person's scenario, and you have to understand what is going on from where they stand. Then you have to see it from another person's perspective, and then you've got to bridge the gap. Now you've got to look at it from your own perspective and make some value judgments maybe. Right. But you're going to have to step outside of where you stand. And psychology is excellent to force people to do that, because what we do is study why people think the way that they think. And a lot of these students have maybe never been outside of LaGrange. They certainly maybe have never been outside the state of Georgia or out of the southeast of the U.S. Well, the expectations of an IB course and the curriculum likely was not even developed in America.
Right.
So it's probably developed in Europe.
Correct.
And so the point of view is very different.
You know, watching the very thing you're describing, watching that unfold in Aiden's class last year with the first group, they had never been forced to put, to act and think from a perspective that was different from their own, and to do it in a convincing way. Yeah. I mean, that has happened over and over in that class, I know, but that has been monumental, and new. And
it has changed the way, and I think if you poll seniors who are the second year of the program, I think that would be a big part of like how their mindset has changed from their 9th and 10th grade year. But Jamie, because I don't want it to be like an IB podcast, but like Jamie, to the third segment here. So we have the profile. We know the IB kids are like hitting these things. What are we doing with that profile to get like vertical alignment for the other, majority of the school that's not in IB classes?
So one thing I wanted to touch on first, if you don't mind, is It sounds like when we hear Ryan talk about an IB psych class versus kind of an AP psych class, we hear you talk a little bit about what was going on in his, history class. For those who haven't walked into an IB classroom, and they know that we've got one cohort with 35, 40 kids in it. This one over here's got 25 folks in it. They may have the interpretation, the impression that these are our top kids that are going to all these huge major colleges and universities, when in reality, it's not that. So I want to kind of, if we can touch on that for just a second, like the
not to say that they're not fantastic.
They're not fantastic.
Right. No,
they are. They're all great kids, but we don't go around and say, okay, give me the top 50 kids that's got the highest GPA, weighted or unweighted, and this and this and this, and it always becomes this elitist kind of program. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
if you walk into a typical IB class, you're going to see all races, all ethnicities, all differing ability groups, that kind of things. Kids that are served gen ed, kids that are served ex ed. I mean, we have a plethora of kids.
And that's such a huge deal because so Ryan and I have worked for College Board, not only as AP teachers, but AP readers. We work, and one of the big things that all AP, the programs, the College Board wants to do is more diversity, more representation in AP classes. And you walk into my fourth block, which is A push right now, there's one minority in that class. You come into any of the IB classes, it doesn't look like that at all.
True.
Right.
Very true.
Extreme diverse program. In multiple different types of ways is it diverse.
So I brought that out to say when we were going back through the initial process, we didn't just say, hey, how about IB and what could that do? A large part of it was taking a look at the demographics in our AP classes
Right.
and saying it's not a true representation of what our general demographics of our school actually looks like. Like,
Right.
how do we have in our upper level classes, how do we have a true representation that matches that of the school? So, IB we thought could kind of make that or simulate, try to create this idea of what that might look like. And it has for the
Yeah.
most part. And I'm super excited about that. So whenever you start talking about that concept, it's really important for people who are not IB people. So when you're talking about like, where do we go from here and how do we create this vertical alignment? Well,
Right.
first of all, people need to know that any student that walks in this door at day one, in the 9th grade or whatever, and those who transfer in, but like they could potentially be an IB student. The question is what are we doing in our classes in the 9th grade, our classes in the 10th grade, whether they be math, science, English, or social studies? Are we preparing those students in those classes to be able to make an honest decision with themselves to say, at the end of my sophomore year, going into my junior year, this is something that I want to try? Or have we just said, well, you know what, this kid traditionally has been this or they've been that, so we're just going to kind of keep them in that track, and they're going to get the credits to graduate because all they're going to do is just kind of go on and get a job at Kia. Not to say that getting a job at Kia is wrong or there's anything wrong with that, but they're just going to stay in LaGrange. Ryan talks about how some of our kids, probably the majority of our kids, have never been out of this
Right.
the city. Now they may have gone to Atlanta or maybe Hogansville, West Point, Columbus, Auburn, but you'd be amazed at how many kids haven't been out of this general area. And but are we preparing them and pushing them in that direction? Or are we
Right.
just, again, going in there and just having class because we're here every day, all day for, 5 days a week, an hour and a half each block, and then we'll do it for 90 days, and then we'll start it over and we'll do it again. I mean, that mindset's got to go. It's got to leave.
I go back. You've got to be, as an instructor, an administrator, and director, and whatever other titles we have, you've got to be intentional in what you're doing every day. Like, if I'm going to, whatever I decide to do with my first block, it needs to be, like, standards are cool, CCRPI, whatever, but like the development of the child, the development of the future citizen in LaGrange, military, work, college, whatever, those 5 points to that graduate profile are the things that we need to be super intentional to make sure that we're developing. Because again, when a kid graduates from LaGrange High School, when they say 10 years down the road, yeah, I graduated from LaGrange High School, do they embody those characteristics? And IB, AP, regular, whatever, all of us have a duty. Coaching, clubs, we all have a duty and responsibility to make sure that kids have those characteristics. And we're developing in some way. Now, obviously, like, parents are a big part of that too, but like, what are we doing day to day to make sure that they are building those skills?
And one thing I've noticed, going back to the start, and how do we flesh out what we intended to do with that start? Not only should that show up, on the planning side for
Right.
teachers, but when you watch your students and when they engage in a personal struggle of some sort, or even when a teacher hits a wall with a student, and you have to work through something together, or they're overcoming some kind of difficulty academically that they've hit, being able to point out, when you see a point of growth happening with them, calling that out,
Right.
and telling them, hey, do you know what's going on here?
Well, there's a lot of times that throughout this year, just looking at students who have hit those walls, because IB can be hard, it can be challenging, and we've had them that have had that self-doubt, that we're looking at. Well, I need to be out of this class, or I need to I need to change what I'm doing,
Right.
and then we have to, have those conversations with them and open that line of communication where they feel open to come and talking with us about that, or talking with other teachers about that. And sometimes I've called you and I've said, hey, this student is struggling,
Right.
and I think that they will open up with you, or I think that maybe you can speak to IB a little bit to them in terms
Right.
of like righting the ship, and in all those cases, we got them on track.
We did, yeah.
Look, I lived that, especially first semester. My son is in IB, and he was in Slay's a psych class first semester, and to see that kid work like I've never seen him work before in his life. I mean, I have seen him work, but not like he has been working this year. And he would take a test, and I remember we were we were away. My wife and I had to go to a funeral, and Jackson had a test in one of Ryan's classes, and so, well, how'd it go? And he's like, I got my grade back. He said, I got to be the dumbest kid at LaGrange High School. And I'm like, what? So he said, I just didn't do well. So he went back, and he could sit there and he could talk to you about the material. And so trying to figure out how all that stuff, worked with him. And I mean, he ended up doing, good in the class and things like that. But just from a personal standpoint, seeing my son grow, has just been absolutely amazing. And the way in which he talks about things and does things and thinks about things, and empathy about things. I mean, it's just, it is, I wish my daughter would have had the opportunity, to.
That's been the funny thing, because having taught AP for so long and just and had the ability to see a lot of good kids, I constantly think about, I know you and I and Aaron will talk about what kids would have been so good in this program.
Oh, I know.
Right.
This program would have been so good for, and that's.
And
Yeah.
also, we have the conversation many times of, a kid who's approaching graduation now, what would they have done, or what would have happened with them if they hadn't been a part of this?
Oh, for sure.
We've just seen some amazing transformation with kids.
Well, and considering, the star and what we're really focused on and being intentional, it's not about them getting into college. It's
No.
not. It's about them graduating from college. If that's the route that they're going to go,
Right.
it's about them doing well and thriving and graduating on time.
So, like I said, in school or advancing in the military or in their
advancing.
career or just at home as a parent or as a husband or as a wife or whatever. It's it goes throughout all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I know we need to wrap up, but I want to throw in there that this whole journey, a lot of work has gone into it by a lot of people,
sure.
and it's hard to name, but Nichelle Wimbush, for example, early on, hit the ground running and dug in, and just the number of staff members that poured into that process, and that was just to get us to the starting point.
That's when it started. It's literally the starting
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
And it's not just what Nichelle Nichelle did it. Really,
Yeah.
she did. Pre-COVID, it was Mr. White. He talked to myself and Jeff Little, who's now the principal at, the Career Center. And we had kind of set it aside. And when we came back, he had asked Nichelle and I to, what do you think? And I'm still trying to figure out can we do this? And instead of, just going at it, she took off with it. And, so LaGrange High School has IB and has a lot of that to owe to her specifically.
Yeah, for sure.
Because she busted it out on that right there. So.
All right, before we sign off, we want to give a sneak peek of what's to come in the future episodes of Granger Talk. So in our next few episodes, what we're going to be doing is really focusing on the 5 characteristics of the Granger Profile, graduate profile, but we're going to be highlighting current and former students of LaGrange High School, people of the community, and who we think embody a particular characteristic. We're going to have them come in, listen to their stories, and really highlight those people.
Ryan, from insightful conversations to inspiring stories, we'll explore how these traits have shaped the lives of our our guests and the impact that they've had on our community.
So once again, we want to thank Mr. Hardigree for being here today to share his insight as the IB coordinator on how the IB program has impacted LaGrange High School, what it's currently doing, and where we go from here. So be sure to subscribe to Granger Talk wherever you listen to podcasts, and join us on our next journey as we celebrate the spirit of what it truly means to be a Granger.
Thanks again for tuning in to our inaugural episode, and we look forward to many more conversations about current and former Granger greats. Go Grangers.
Go Grangers.
Go Granger.
Go Grangers.